Chapter 27. The sun was high in the heavens, or fairly high, when I woke next morning. From behind the closed door of Boco's sleeping apartment there proceeded a rhythmic sound like the sawing of wood, indicating that he had not yet sprung from his bed. I would have liked to waken him and ask if all was well, but refrained. No doubt I felt he had returned at a late hour and needed an extra bit of what I have heard Jeeves call tired nature's sweet restorer. I donned the bathing suit and bathrobe and started off for the river, and I hadn't more than shoved my nose outside the garden gate when along came Nobby on her bicycle. It would have been plain even to the most casual observer that Nobby was in the pink. Her eyes were shining like twin stars, as the expression is, and she greeted me with one of the heartiest pip-pips that ever proceeded from female throats. "Hello, Bertie!" she cried. "I say, Bertie, isn't everything super-colossal?" "I think so," I replied. "I hope so. I left Uncle Percy in malleable mood, and Boco was just going to confer with him. All should have gone well." "Then you haven't heard? Didn't Boco tell you?" "I haven't seen him yet. Our waking moments have not synchronized. When he got back I was asleep, and when I got up he was asleep." "Oh, I see. Well, he came round in the small hours and threw gravel at my window and made his report. Everything went like a breeze. It did. According to Boco, the thing was a love feast. Uncle Percy sent him back to the bar for another bottle of champagne, and they split it like a couple of sailors on shore leave. And he's given his consent. Definitely, Boco says. He's so grateful for all you've done, Bertie. So am I. I could kiss you." "Just as you wish," I assented civilly, and she did so. Then she legged it for the house, and I proceeded on my way to the river. My mood, as I clove its crystal waters, was, as you may imagine, pretty uplifted. Nobby's story had left no room for doubt that happy endings had come popping up like rabbits. I had forgotten to ask her when she was going to show that letter to Florence, but no doubt this would be done in the course of the morning, releasing me from my honourable obligations. And as for her and Boco, it was well within the bounds of possibility that before nightfall they would be united in the bonds of holy wedlock. Boco had made no secret of the fact that for many a day past he had had the licence tucked away in the drawer of his desk, ready to do its stuff the moment the starter's pistol went. In addition to this, Stilton's uniform was floating on its way to the sea, and absolutely nothing to prove that it and Bertram had ever been in any way connected. It was just possible that some inkling of the truth might come to the promising young copper, causing him to regard me, when we next met, with sullen suspicion, and even to go so far as to grind his teeth. But as for his assembling a telling weight of evidence which would land me in the dock, and subsequently in the lowest dungeon beneath the castle moat, not a hope. It was accordingly with no uncertain feeling that this was the maddest, merriest day of all the glad new year that I returned to the house, where genial smells from the dining-room greeted the nostrils and caused me to dress like a streak. Entering the food zone a few moments later, I found Boco restoring his tissues, with Nobby sitting on the end of the table, drinking in his every word. "Ah, Bertie," said Boco. "Good morning, Bertie. Now you're here, I'd better start again." He did so, and for some minutes held me spellbound. Even though I had heard the outline of the plot from Nobby, and so knew how it all came out in the end, I hung upon his lips from start to finish. "You didn't get his consent in writing?" I asked as he concluded. "Well, no," he admitted. "It never occurred to me. But if what is on your mind is that he may try to back out of it, don't worry. You have no conception, Bertie, literally no conception of the chumminess which exists between us. Hands were shaken and backs slapped. He was all over me like a bedspread. Well, to give you some idea, he said he wished he had a son like me. Well, considering he's got a son like Edwin, that isn't saying much. Don't be a wet blanket, Bertie. Don't try to cast a gloom on this wonderful morning. Another thing he said was that he hoped that I would be very successful in Hollywood and would remain working there for many years, in fact indefinitely. One sees what he meant, of course. Like others, he has long chafed at the rottenness of motion pictures, and is relying on me to raise the standard." "You will, Angel," said Nobby. "You betcha," said Boco, swilling coffee. The meal proceeded on its pleasant course. A less kindly man than Bertie Wooster might have struck a jarring note by bringing up the matter of that porpentine in my bed, but I refrained from this. Instead, I asked what became of Uncle Percy at the close of the proceedings. "I suppose he pushed home on his push-bike," said Boko. "What did you do with Stilton's uniform?" I explained that I had committed it to the deep, and he said I could not have made a wiser move. And he was just starting to be dashed funny about my last night's outer crust, when I stopped him with an imperious gesture. Out of the corner of my eye, I had seen something large and blue turning in at the garden gate. A moment later there came the sound of feet crunching on gravel, and the timbre and volume of the noise was such that only regulation official boots could have caused it. I was not surprised when in due season the torso and helmeted head of Stilton were framed in the open window. And more profoundly than ever I congratulated myself on the shrewdness and foresight which had led me to bung that uniform into the river. "Ah, Stilton," I said, and what is more, I said it airily. The keenest ear could not have detected that the conscience was not as clean as a whistle. One prefers, of course, on all occasions, to be stainless and above reproach, but failing that, the next best thing is unquestionably to have got rid of the body. Boko, who is always a perfect host, bade the newcomer a cheery good morning, and asked him to keep his mouth open and he would throw a sardine into it. But apparently the latter had already breakfasted, for he declined the invitation with a petulant jerk of the head. "Ho!" he said. Touching for a moment on this matter of policemen and the word ho, I have an idea that the first thing they teach the young recruit on joining the force is how to utter this ejaculation. I've never met a roser yet who didn't say it, and they all say it in just the same way. Inevitably one is led to assume a course of schooling.
"So there you are, you blasted Wooster."
Speculating, as I had done from time to time since the previous evening, on the probable demeanour of this painstaking young officer when next he should catch sight of me, I had never anticipated that it would be Elfin. I had budgeted for the dark frown, the flushed face, and the hard and bulging eye, and there they all were, precisely as foreshadowed, and they found me ready to cope with them. I preserved my aplomb. "Yes, here I am," I responded, buttering a nonchalant slice of toast. "Where else would I be, my dear Stilton? This, thanks to Boko's princely hospitality, is where I'm living."
"Ho!" said Stilton. "Well, you won't be living here much longer, because you're bally well coming along with me."
Boko looked at me and raised his eyebrows. I looked at Boko and raised my eyebrows. Nobby looked at us both and raised her eyebrows. Then we looked at Stilton and all raised our eyebrows. It was one of those big eyebrow-raising mornings.
"Coming along with you? Surely, Stilton," said Boko, "you do not use that expression in a technical sense." "Yes, I do."
"You've come to arrest Bertie?"
"Yes, I have."
"What for?"
"Pinching my uniform."
Nobby turned to me in girlish astonishment. "Have you been pinching Stilton's uniform, Bertie?"
"Certainly not."
"How lucky."
"Extremely fortunate."
"Because I suppose you could get about 3 months for a thing like that."
"Besides the shame of it all," I pointed out, "if I ever feel the temptation to commit this rash act, I must fight against it. Not that I imagine I shall."
"Pretty unlikely," Nobby agreed. "I mean, what on earth would you want a policeman's uniform for?"
"Exactly," I said. "You have touched the matter with a needle."
"Done what?"
"One of Jeeves's gags," I explained. "Rem something, Latin stuff."
Boko, who had been frowning thoughtfully, went more deeply into the matter. I believe I know what's on Stilton's mind," he said. "I don't think I told you, but yesterday, while he was bathing, somebody snitched his uniform, which he had left lying on the bank. Did I mention it?" "Not to my recollection," said Nobby.
"Nor to mine,"
I said, shaking the bean. "Odd," said Boko. "I suppose it slipped my mind." "Things do," said Nobby.
"Frequently," I agreed. "Well, that's what happened, and one can't blame him for wanting to bring the criminal to justice. But why he's got this extraordinary idea that it was Bertie who was responsible for the foul outrage is more than I can understand. I told you yesterday, Stilton, that the hidden hand was almost certainly young Edwin's." "Yes, and I've just been tackling him about it. He denies it categorically."
"And you accept his word?"
"Yes, I do. He has an alibi."
"Well, you perfect chump!" cried Nobby. "Don't you know that dishes him? Haven't you ever read any detective stories? Ask Lord Peter Wimsey what an alibi amounts to."
"Or Monsieur Poirot,"
I suggested. "Yes, or Reggie Fortune, or Inspector French, or Nero Wolfe.
I can't understand a man of your intelligence falling for that alibi stuff. Incredible, I said. The oldest trick in the game. Trot along and bust it is my advice, Stilton, said Boko. One might have expected a cop to wilt beneath all this, but it speedily became plain that the Cheesewrights were made of sterner stuff. "If you want to know why I accept young Edwin's alibi," said Stilton, allowing his eyes to bulge a bit farther from the parents' sockets, "it's because it's supported by the vicar's wife, the curate's sister, the doctor's aunt, a scoutmaster, 15 assorted tradesmen, and 47 Boy Scouts. It appears that the doctor was giving a lecture on first aid in the village hall yesterday evening, and Edwin was the chap who went on the platform and was illustrated on. At the moment when my uniform was pinched, he was lying on a table, swathed in bandages, showing what you have to do to a bloke with a fractured thigh bone." This, I admit, spiked our guns to no little extent. Nobby did say that it might have been an accomplice cunningly disguised to look like Edwin, but you could see that it was simply a suggestion. "Yes," said Boko at length, that does seem to let Edwin out, but I still don't see where you get this extraordinary idea that Bertie is the culprit." "I'll tell you that, too," said Stilton, plainly resolved to keep nothing from us. "Edwin, questioned, had an amazing story to relate. He stated that going to a Q's bedroom later in the evening to put a hedgehog in his bed—" "Ah!" I exclaimed, and gave Boko a penitent look, remorseful that even in thought I should have wronged my kind host. "He saw the uniform there. And I met a chap this morning who'd been an extra waiter at the fancy dress ball at East Wibley last night, and he informs me that there was a loathsome-looking object taking part in the festivities, dressed in a policeman's uniform 6 sizes too large for him. I am ready to step along, Wooster, if you are." It seemed to me a fair cop, as I believe the expression is, and I saw nothing to be gained by postponing the inevitable. I rose and wiped the lips with the napkin like a French aristocrat informed that the tumbrel is at the door. Boko's hat, however, was still in the ring. "Just a minute, Stilton," he said. "Not so fast, officer. Have you a warrant?" The question seemed to discompose Stilton. "Why, no." "Must have a warrant," said Boko. "You can't make a summary arrest on a serious charge like this." The momentary weakness passed. Stilton was himself again. "I don't believe it," he said stoutly. "I think you're talking through your hat. Still, I'll go to the station and ask the sergeant." He vanished, and Boko became brisk and efficient. "You'll have to leg it, Bertie," he said, "and without a second's delay. Get your car, drive to London, and go abroad. They won't be watching the ports yet. Better look in at the Cohen brothers en route and buy a false moustache." It isn't often that I would care to allow this borderline case's counsel to rule my actions, but on this occasion it seemed to me that his advice was good. I had been thinking along the same lines myself. Oh, as a matter of fact, I had just been saying to myself at that very moment, "for the wings of a dove." Briefly requesting him to get hold of Jeeves and tell him to follow with the personal effects, I streaked for the garage, and I was just about to fling wide the gates, when there suddenly came from the other side of the door the sound of a hoarse voice, and I paused astounded. Unless the ears had deceived me, there was a human soul inside the edifice. It spoke again, and what enabled me to get abreast and identify the thorax from which it proceeded was the fact that one caught the name Fittleworth preceded by a number of qualifying adjectives of a rugged and rather Elizabethan nature. In a flash I got the whole set-up. Driving away from the East Wibley Town Hall at the conclusion of the recent festivities, Boko must inadvertently have taken Uncle Percy with him. He had sped homewards with a song on his lips, and all unknown to him, overlooked while getting a spot of tired nature's sweet restorer in the back of the car, the old relative had come along for the ride. Chapter 28. I drew in the breath with a startled whoosh, and for some moments stood rooted to the S, the brow furrowed, the eyes bulging. To say that this thing had come upon me like a sock behind the ear from a stuffed eel-skin would be in no wise to overstate the facts. As I stood there with my ear against the door, listening to what was filtering through the woodwork, it is not too much to say that melancholy marked me for its own. Consider the position, I mean. The one thing that was of the essence was that Boko should keep this man a thing of sweetness and light, and it was absurd to suppose that this could be done by locking him up all night in garages in the costume of Sinbad the Sailor. A man of generous spirit like Uncle Percy inevitably chafes at such treatment. He was chafing now. I could hear him. The tone of his observations left no room for misunderstanding. They were not the obiter dicts of one who, when released, would laugh heartily at the amusing little misunderstanding, but rather of a man whose earnest endeavour it would be to skin the person responsible for his incarceration. Indeed, it was upon this very point that he had now begun to touch, and not only was he resolved to skin Boko, he stressed in unmistakable terms his intention of doing it lingeringly and with a blunt knife. In short, it was abundantly clear that, however beautiful might have been the friendship which had been started overnight between his host and himself, it had now taken a bad toss and definitely come unstuck. I found myself, frankly, unable to cope with the situation. It was one of those which seemed to call imperiously for a word or two of advice from Jeeves, and I was just regretting that he was not there, when a gentle cough in my rear told me that he was. It was as if some sort of telepathy, if that's the word I want, had warned him that the young master had lost his grip and could do with 2 pennyworth of feudal assistance. "Jeeves!" I cried, and clutched him by the coat sleeve like a lost child hooking on to its mother. When I had finished pouring my tale into his receptive ear, it was plain that he had not failed to grasp the nub. "Most disturbing, sir," he said. "Most," I responded. I refrained from wounding him with any word of censure and rebuke, but I could not but feel, as I have so frequently felt before, that a spot of leaping about and eyeball rolling would have been more in keeping with the gravity of the situation. If Jeeves has a fault, as I think I've already mentioned, it is that he is too prone merely to tut, at times when you would prefer to see his knotted and combined locks do a bit of parting. "His lordship, you gather, sir, is incensed?" I could answer that one. "Yes, Jeeves. His remarks, as far as I was able to catch them, were unquestionably those of a man a good deal steamed up. What is the death of the 1,000 cuts?" "It is a penal sentence in vogue in Chinese police courts for minor offences, roughly equivalent to our 14 days with the option of a fine. Why do you ask, sir?" "Uncle Percy happened to mention it in passing. It's one of the things he's planning to do to Boko when they get together." "Good Lord, Jeeves!" I exclaimed. "Sir?" The reason I had exclaimed as above was that this mention of police courts and penal sentences had suddenly reminded me of my own position. For a brief space the mind, occupied with this business of uncles in garages, had slid away from the fact that I was a fugitive from a chain gang. "You haven't heard the latest. Stilton. He has found out about that uniform and has gone off to get warrants and things." "Indeed, sir?" "Yes. Young Edwin, creeping into my room last night in order to insinuate a hedgehog into my bed, saw the things lying there and went and squealed to Stilton, the degraded little copper's nark. Only by making an immediate getaway can I hope to escape undergoing the utmost rigours of the law. You see the frightful dilemma I'm on the horns of. My car's in the garage. To get it, I shall have to open the door, and opening the door involves having Uncle Percy come popping out like a cork out of a bottle." "You shrink from an encounter with his lordship, sir?" "Yes, Jeeves, I shrink from an encounter with his lordship. Oh, I know what you're going to say. You're about to point out that it was Boko who lodged him in the coop, not me." "Precisely, sir. You are not armed so strong in honesty that his lordship's displeasure will pass by you as the idle wind, which you respect not." "I dare say. But have you ever removed a wounded puma from a trap?" "No, sir, I have not had that experience." "Well, anyone will tell you that on such occasions the animal does not pause to pick and choose. It just goes bald-headed for the nearest innocent bystander in sight." "I appreciate your point, sir. It might be better if you were to return to the house and allow me to extricate his lordship." His nobility stunned me. "Would you, Jeeves?" "Certainly, sir." "Pretty white of you." "Not at all, sir." "You could turn the key, shout 'all clear,' and then run like a rabbit." "I would prefer to linger on the scene, sir, in the hope of doing something to smooth his lordship's wounded feelings." "With honeyed words, you mean?" "Precisely, sir." I drew a deep breath. "You wouldn't consider at least climbing a tree?" No, sir.
I drew another one. Well, all right, if you say so. You know best. Carry on then, Jeeves.
Very good, sir. I will bring your car to the front door so that you will be enabled to make an immediate start. I will follow later in the day with the suitcases.
It was some slight consolation to me in this dark hour to reflect, as I tooled back to the house, that the news I was bearing would, if he was still eating sardines, cause those sardines to turn to ashes in Boco's mouth. I am not a vindictive man, but I was feeling in no amiable frame of mind towards this literary screwball. I mean, it's all very well for a chap to plead that he's an author, and expect on the strength of that to get away with conduct which would qualify the ordinary man for a one-way ticket to Colney Hatch. But even an author, I felt, and I think with justice, ought to have had the sense to glance through his car before he locked it up for the night, to make sure there weren't any shipping magnates dozing in the back seat. As it happened, he was past the sardines phase. He was lolling in his chair in quiet enjoyment of the after-breakfast pipe, while Nobby, at his side, did the crossword puzzle in the morning paper. At the sight of Bertram, both expressed surprise. "Why, hello," said Nobby.
"Haven't you gone yet?"
said Boco. "No, I haven't," I replied, and laughed a hard, mirthless one. It caused Boco to frown disapprovingly.
"What's the idea of coming here and trilling with laughter?" he asked austerely. "You must try to get into your head, my lad, that this is not the time for that sort of thing. Don't you realize your position? Unless you're across the channel by nightfall, you haven't a hope. Where's your car?"
"In the garage."
"Then get it out of the garage."
"I can't," I said, letting him have it right in the gizzard. "Uncle Percy's there." And in a few crisp words I slipped him the lowdown. I had anticipated that my statement would get in amongst him a bit, and this expectation was fulfilled. Man and boy, I've seen a good many lower jaws fall, but never one that shot down with such a sudden swoop as his. It was surprising that the thing didn't come off its hinges.
"But how is he in my car? He can't have been in my car. Why didn't I notice him?"
This, of course, was susceptible of a ready explanation. "Because you are a fathead." Nobby, who since the initial spilling of the beans had been sitting bolt upright in her chair with gleaming eyes, making little gulping noises and chewing the lower lip with pearly teeth, endorsed this. "Fathead," she concurred, speaking in a strange, strangled voice, "is right. Of all—" Preoccupied though Boco was, there must have penetrated to his consciousness some inkling of what the harvest would be were she permitted to get going and really start hauling up her slacks. He strove to head her off with a tortured gesture.
"Just a minute, darling. Of all the— Yes, of all the gibbering— Quite. But half a second, Angel. Bertie and I are threshing out an important point. Let me just try to envisage what happened after you left last night, Bertie. Here is the sequence as I recall it. I had my talk with old Worplesdon, and, as I told you, secured a guardian's blessing. And then, I went back to the ballroom to tread the measure for a while.
Of all the gibbering half-witted—
Exactly. But don't interrupt the flow of my thoughts, precious. I'm trying to get this thing straight. I danced a saraband or two, and then looked in the bar for a moment. I wanted to get a snootful and muse over my happiness. And I was doing this when it suddenly occurred to me that Nobby was probably tossing sleeplessly on her pillow, dying to hear how everything had come out, and I felt that I must get home immediately and go and bung gravel at her window. I raced back to the car accordingly, sprang to the wheel, and drove off. I see now why I didn't notice old Worplesdon. Obviously the man by that time had passed out and was lying on the floor. Well, dash it! A chap in my frame of mind, all joy and ecstasy and excitement, with his soul full to the brim of tender thoughts of the girl he loved, couldn't be expected to go over the floor of his car with a magnifying glass on the chance that there might be Worplesdons there. Naturally, not observing him, I assumed he'd gone off on his push-bike. Would you have had me borrow a couple of bloodhounds and search the tonneau from end to end? I'm sure you understand everything now, darling, and will be the first to withdraw the adjective gibbering. Oh, I'm not angry, said Boco. In fact, not even surprised that in the heat of the moment you should have spoken as you did, just so long as you realize that I am innocent, blameless. At this juncture there was a confused noise without, and Uncle Percy crossed the threshold, moving well. A moment later, Jeeves shimmered in his wake. Having become so accustomed during our hobnobbings of the previous day to seeing this uncle by marriage in genial and comradely mood, I had almost forgotten how, like the Assyrian swooping down on the fold, he could look when deeply stirred, and that he was so now rather leapt to the eye. The ginger whiskers which go with the costume of Sinbad the Sailor obscured his countenance to a great extent, rendering it difficult to note the full play of expression on the features, but one was able to observe his eyes, and that was enough to be going on with. Fixed on Boko with an unwinking glare, they had the effect of causing that unhappy purveyor of wholesome literature for the masses to recoil at least a dozen feet, and he would undoubtedly have gone farther had he not fetched up against the wall. Jeeves had spoken of his intention of trying to smooth the ruffled Worplesdon feelings with honeyed words. Whether he hadn't been allowed to get one in edgeways, or whether he had tried a few and they hadn't been honeyed enough, I was not in a position to say. But the fact was patent that the above feelings were still as ruffled as Dammit, and that Hampshire contained at this moment no hotter-under-the-collar shipping magnate. Proof of this was given by his opening speech, which consisted of the word "what," repeated over and over again, as if fired from a machine gun. It was always this uncle's practice, as I mentioned, to what rather freely in moments of emotion, and he did not deviate from it on this occasion.
"What?"
he said in part, continuing to focus the eye on Boko.
What?
Here he paused, as if for a reply, and I think Boko did the wrong thing by asking him if he would like a sardine. The question, seeming to touch an exposed nerve, caused a sheet of flame to shoot from his eyes.
Sardine?
He said with bitter intonation.
Sardine? Sardine? Sardine?
"You'll feel better when you've had some breakfast," said Nobby, pulling a quick ministering angel vow. Uncle Percy opposed this view.
"I shall not. The only thing that can make me feel better is to thrash that pie-faced young warthog Fittleworth within an inch of his life. Bertie, get me a horsewhip."
I pursed the lips dubiously. "I don't believe we have one," I said. "Are there any horsewhips on the premises, Boko?"
No horsewhips," the latter responded, now trying to get through the wall.
Uncle Percy snorted.
"Wodehouse. Jeeves,
"My lord?"
go over to the hall and bring me my horsewhip with the ivory handle."
"Yes, my lord."
"I think it's in my study. If not, hunt about for it."
"Very good, my lord. No doubt her ladyship will be able to inform me of the instrument's whereabouts."
He spoke so casually that it was perhaps 3 seconds by the stopwatch before Uncle Percy got the gist. When he did, he started like one jabbed in the fleshy parts with a sudden bradawl.
"Her... what?"
"Her ladyship, my lord."
"Her ladyship?"
"Yes, my lord."
Uncle Percy had crumpled like a wet sock. He sank into a chair and clutched the marmalade jar as if for support. His eyes popped out of his head and waved about on their stalks.
"But her ladyship..."
"Returned unexpectedly late last night, my lord."
Chapter 29. I don't know if the name of Lot's wife is familiar to you, and if you were told about her rather remarkable finish. I may not have got the facts right, but the story as I heard it was that she was advised not to look round at something or other, or she would turn into a pillar of salt. So, naturally imagining that they were simply pulling her leg, she looked round, and bing, a pillar of salt. And the reason I mention this now is that the very same thing seemed to have happened to Uncle Percy. Crouching there with his fingers riveted to the marmalade jar, he appeared to have turned into a pillar of salt. If it hadn't been that the ginger whiskers were quivering gently, you would have said that life had ceased to animate the rigid limbs.
"It appears that Master Thomas is now out of danger, my lord, and no longer has need of her ladyship's ministrations."
The whiskers continued to quiver, and I didn't blame them. I knew just how the old relative must be feeling, for as I have already indicated, he had made no secret when chatting with me of his apprehensions concerning the shape of things to come, should Aunt Agatha ever learn that he had been attending fancy dress dances in her absence. The poignant drama of it all had not escaped Nobby either. "Golly, Uncle Percy," she said, a womanly pity in her voice that became her well, "this is a bit awkward, is it not? You'll have to devote a minute or two when you see her to explaining why you were out all night, won't you?" Her words had the effect of bringing the unhappy man out of his trance or coma, as if she had touched off a stick of dynamite under him. He moved, he stirred, he seemed to feel the rush of life along his keel.
"Jeeves,"
he said hoarsely. "My lord?"
"Jeeves."
"My lord?" Uncle Percy shoved out his tongue about an inch, moistening the lips with the tip of it. It was plain that he was finding it no easy matter to get speech over the larynx.
"Her ladyship, Jeeves, tell me, is she by any chance aware of my absence?"
"Yes, my lord. She was apprised of it by the head housemaid. I left them in conference. You tell me his lordship's bed has not been slept in," her ladyship was saying. "Her agitation was most pronounced." I caught Uncle Percy's eye. It had swivelled round at me with a dumb pleading look in it, as if saying that suggestions would be welcomed. "How would it be," I said, well, one had to say something, "if you told her the truth?"
"The truth?"
he repeated dazedly, and you could see he thought the idea a novel one, "that you went to the ball to confer with Clam." He shook his head.
"I could never convince your aunt that I had gone to a fancy dress ball from purely business motives. Women are so prone to think the worst.
Something in that.
And it's no good trying to make them see reason, because they talk so damn quick. No," said Uncle Percy, "this is the end. I can only set my teeth and take my medicine like an English gentleman."
Unless, of course, Jeeves has something to suggest. This perked him up for an instant. Then the drawn, haggard look came back into his face, and he shook the lemon again, slowly and despondently.
"Impossible. The situation is beyond Jeeves."
"No situation is beyond Jeeves," I said with quiet rebuke. "In fact," I went on, scrutinizing the man closely, "I believe something is fermenting now inside that spacious bean. Am I wrong, Jeeves, in supposing that I can see the light of inspiration in your eye?"
"No, sir. You are quite correct. I think that I may, perhaps, be able to offer a satisfactory solution of his lordship's difficulty."
Uncle Percy inhaled sharply. An awed look came into the unoccupied areas of his face. I heard him murmur something under his breath about fish.
"You mean that, Jeeves?"
"Yes, my lord."
"Then let us have it," I said, feeling rather like some impresario of performing fleas who watches the star member of his troupe advance to the footlights. "What is this solution of which you speak?"
"Well, sir, it occurred to me that as his lordship has, as I understand, given his consent to the union of Mr. Fittleworth and Miss Hopwood—"
Uncle Percy uttered an animal cry.
"I haven't, or if I did, I've withdrawn it."
"Very good, my lord. In that case, I have nothing to suggest."
There was a silence. One could sense the struggle proceeding in Uncle Percy's bosom. I saw him look at Boko and quiver. Then a strong shudder passed through the frame, and I knew he was recalling what Jeeves had said about Aunt Agatha's agitation being most pronounced. When Aunt Agatha's agitation is pronounced, she has a way of drawing her eyebrows together and making her nose look like an eagle's beak. Strong men have quailed at the spectacle repeatedly.
"May as well hear what you've got to say, I suppose,"
he said at length. "Quite," I agreed. "No harm in having a— what, Jeeves?"
"Academic discussion, sir."
"Thank you, Jeeves. Not at all, sir. Carry on, then."
"Very good, sir. It merely occurred to me that, had his lordship consented to the union, nothing would have been more natural than that he should have visited Mr. Fittleworth at his house for the purpose of talking the matter over and making arrangements for the wedding. Immersed in this absorbing subject, his lordship would quite understandably have lost count of time."
I yipped intelligently. I had got the set-up, and when he looked at his watch and found how late it was—
"Precisely, sir. When his lordship looked at his watch and found out how late it was, Mr. Fittleworth hospitably suggested that he should pass the remainder of the night beneath his roof. His lordship agreed that this would be the most convenient course, and so it was arranged."
I looked at Uncle Percy, confidently expecting the salvo of applause, and was amazed to find him shaking the bean once more.
"It wouldn't work,"
he said. "Why on earth not? It's a pip." He kept on oscillating the lozenge.
"No, Bertie, the scheme is not practical. Your aunt, my dear boy, is a suspicious woman. She probes beneath the surface and asks questions, and the first one she would ask on this occasion would be, why, merely in order to discuss wedding arrangements with my ward's future husband, did I dress up as Sinbad the Sailor? You can see for yourself how awkward that question would be, and how difficult to answer.
The point was well taken. A snag, Jeeves. Can you get round it?
Quite easily, sir. Before returning to the hall, his lordship could borrow a suit of clothes from you, sir.
Of course he could. Clad in the herringbone tweed which is in the cupboard in my bedroom, Uncle Percy, you could look Aunt Agatha in the eye without a tremor. I dare say you have frequently, when strolling in your garden, seen a parched flower beneath a refreshing downpour. It was of such a flower that Uncle Percy now irresistibly reminded me. He seemed to swell and burgeon, as it were, and the strained eyes lost that resemblance to the underside of a dead fish which had been so noticeable since the beginning of this sequence.
Good Lord, he exclaimed, you're quite right. So I could. Jeeves, he went on emotionally, you must have that brain of yours pickled and presented to some national museum.
Very good, my lord.
When you've done with it, of course. Come on, Bertie, action, action. Ho for the herringbone tweed.
This way, Uncle Percy, I said, and we started for the door, to find our path barred by Boko. He was looking a bit green about the gills, but firm and resolute.
Just a minute, said Boko. Not so jolly fast, if you don't mind.
How about that guardian's blessing? Do I cop? Of course you do, old bird, I said soothingly. That's all budgeted for in the estimates, Uncle Percy.
Hey? What?
The guardian's bee. You're dishing that out? Once more there was that silent struggle. Then he nodded sombrely.
It seems unavoidable.
It is unavoidable.
Then I won't try to avoid it.
OK, Boko, you're all set. Good, said Boko. I'll just have that in writing, if you don't mind, my dear Worplesdon. I don't want to carp or criticise, but there's been a lot of in and out running about this business to present date, and one would welcome a few words in black and white. You will find pen and ink on the table in the corner. Sing out, my dear Worplesdon, if the nib doesn't suit you, and I will provide you with another. Uncle Percy went to the table in the corner and took pen in hand. It would be too much to say that his demeanour, as he did so, was rollicking. I fancy that, up to this moment, he had been entertaining a faint hope that if his luck held, he might somehow derive the benefits from Jeeves's scheme without having to sit in on its drawbacks. However, as I say, he took pen in hand, and having scribbled for a minute or so, handed the result to Boko, who read it through and handed it to Nobby, who read it through and tucked it away with a satisfied okey-doke in some safe deposit in the recesses of her costume. She had scarcely done so when heavy official footsteps sounded without, and Stilton came clumping in. You will scarcely believe me, but it is a fact that I had been so tensely gripped by the drama of the last quarter of an hour that the Stilton angle had been completely expunged from my mind, and it was only now, as I watched him heave to, that the thought of the Wooster personal peril came back to me. The first thing he did on entering the room was to give me one of those looks of his, and it chilled my insides like a quart of ice cream. I had a shot at an airy, "Ah, there you are, Stilton," but my heart was not in it, and it elicited no response except a short ho. Having got off this ho, which, as I have explained, was in the nature of a sort of signature tune, he addressed himself to Boko.
"You were right about that warrant," he said. "The sergeant says I've got to have one. I brought it along. It has to be signed by a justice of the peace."
Here, for the first time, he appeared to become aware of Uncle Percy's identity, which, of course, had been shrouded from him by the whiskers.
"Why, hello, Lord Worplesdon," he said. "You're just the man I was looking for. If you will shove your name on the dotted line, we can go ahead. So, you went to that fancy dress ball last night," he said, giving him the eye.
I think he had merely intended to be chatty, and to show a kindly interest, as it were, in the relatives' affairs, but he had said the wrong thing. Uncle Percy stiffened haughtily.
"What do you mean I went to the fancy dress ball last night? I did nothing of the kind, and I should be glad if you will refrain from making loose statements of that description. Went to the fancy dress ball, indeed. What fancy dress ball? Where? It's news to me that there's been a fancy dress ball."
His generous indignation seemed to take Stilton aback.
"Oh, sorry," he said. "I just thought... the costume, I mean."
"And what about the costume? If my ward and her future husband are planning an evening of amateur theatricals, and asked me as a personal favour to put on the costume of Sinbad the Sailor to see if I was the type for the part, is it so singular that I should good-humouredly have acceded to their wishes? And is it any business of yours? Does it entitle you to jump to idiotic conclusions about fancy dress balls? Have I got to explain every simple little action of mine to every flat-footed copper who comes along and can't keep his infernal nose out of my business?
These were not easy questions to answer, and the best Stilton could do was to shuffle his feet and say, "Oh, ah."
Well, anyway, he said after a rather painful pause, changing the subject and getting back to the raise, would you mind signing this warrant?
Warrant? What warrant? What's it all about? What's all this nonsense about warrants?
There was a sound in the background, like a distant sheep coughing gently on a mountainside. Jeeves sailing into action.
If I might explain, your lordship. It appears that in the course of yesterday afternoon, the officer's uniform was purloined as he bathed in the river. He accuses Mr. Wooster of the crime.
Mr. Wooster? Bertie? My nephew?
Yes, my lord. To me, a most bizarre theory. One seeks in vain for a motive which could plausibly have led Mr. Wooster to perpetrate such an outrage. The constable, I understand, alleges that Mr. Wooster desired the uniform in order to be able to attend the fancy dress ball.
This seemed to interest Uncle Percy.
There really was a fancy dress ball, was there?
Yes, my lord, at the neighbouring town of East Wibley.
Odd. I never heard about it.
A very minor affair, my lord, I gather. Not at all the sort of entertainment in which a gentleman of Mr. Wooster's position would condescend to participate.
Of course not. I wouldn't have gone to it myself. Just one of those potty little country affairs, eh?
Precisely, my lord. Nobody, knowing Mr. Wooster, would suppose for a moment that he would waste his sweetness on such desert air.
Eh?
A quotation, my lord, the poet Gray.
Ah, but you say the officer sticks to it that he did?
Yes, my lord. It is fortunate, therefore, that your lordship passed the night in this house, and so is able to testify that Mr. Wooster never left the premises.
Dashed fortunate. Settles the whole thing.
I never know when I am telling a story where a couple of fellows are talking and a third fellow is trying to shove his oar in, whether to interpolate the last name's gulps and gurgles in the run of the dialogue, or to wait till it's all over and then chalk up these gulps and gurgles to their utterer's score. I think it works out smoother the second way, and that is why, in recording the above exchanges, I have left out Stilton's attempts to chip in. All through this Jeeves-Worplesdon exchange of ideas, he had been trying to catch the speaker's eye, only to be charred and "be quiet, officered" by Uncle Percy. A lull in the conversation having occurred at the word thing, he was now able to speak his piece.
I tell you the accused Wooster did pinch my uniform,
he cried, his eyes bulging more than ever, and his cheeks a pretty scarlet.
It was seen on his bed by the witness Edwin.
Things were going so well that I felt equal to raising the eyebrows and coming through with a light amused laugh. Edwin, Uncle Percy. One smiles, does one not? The relative backed me up nobly.
Smiles? Certainly one smiles, like the Dickens. Are you trying to tell me,
he said, letting Stilton have the eye in no uncertain measure,
that this preposterous accusation of yours is based on the unsupported word of my son Edwin? I can scarcely credit it. Can you, Jeeves?
Most extraordinary, my lord. But possibly the officer is not aware that Mr. Wooster inflicted a personal assault upon Master Edwin yesterday, and so does not realize how biased any statement on the part of the young gentleman regarding Mr. Wooster must inevitably be.
Don't make excuses for him. The man's a fool. And I should like to say,
said Uncle Percy, swelling like a balloon, and starting to give Stilton the strong remarks from the bench,
that we've had, in my opinion, far too much of late of these wild and irresponsible accusations on the part of the police. A deplorable spirit is creeping into the force, and as long as I remain a justice of the peace, I shall omit no word or act to express my strongest disapproval of it. I shall stamp it out root and branch, and see to it that the liberty of the subject is not placed in jeopardy by officers of the law who so far forget their, yes, dash it, their sacred obligations, as to bring trumped-up charges right and left in a selfish desire to secure promotion. I have nothing further to add, except to express my profound regret that you should have been subjected to this monstrous persecution, Bertie.
Quite all right, Uncle Percy.
It is not all right. It is outrageous. I advise you in future, officer, to be careful, very careful. As for that warrant of yours, you can take it and stick it. However, that is neither here nor there.
It was good stuff. Indeed, I can't remember ever having heard better, except once, when I was a stripling and Aunt Agatha was ticking me off for breaking a valuable china vase with my catapult. I confidently expected Stilton to cower beneath it like a worm in a thunderstorm. But he didn't. It was plain that he burned, not with shame and remorse, but with the baffled fury of the man who, while not quite abreast of the run of the scenario, realizes that dirty work is afoot at the crossroads, and that something swift is being slipped across him.
"Ho!" he said, and paused for a moment to wrestle with his feelings. Then, with generous emotion,
"It's a bally conspiracy," he cried. "It's a low-down, horns-waggling plot to defeat the ends of justice. For the last time, Lord Worplesdon, will you sign this warrant?"
Nothing could have been more dignified than Uncle Percy's demeanour. He drew himself up, and his voice was quiet and cold.
"I have already indicated what you can do with that warrant. I think, officer, that it would be well if you were to go and sleep it off. For the kindest interpretation which I can place upon your extraordinary behaviour is that you are intoxicated. Bertie, show the constable the door."
I showed Stilton the door, and he took a sort of dazed look at it, as if it were the first time he'd seen the bally thing. Then he navigated slowly through, and disappeared, not even pausing to say ho over his shoulder. The impression I received was that his haughty spirit was at last crushed. Presently we heard the sound of his violin cases tramping away down the garden path.
"And now, my boy," said Uncle Percy, as the last echoes died away, "for the herringbone tweed. Also a bath, a shave, and a cup of strong black coffee, with perhaps the merest suspicion of brandy in it. And perhaps it would be as well, when I am ready to start for the hall, if you were to accompany me, to add your testimony to mine regarding my spending last night under this roof. You will not falter, will you? You will support my statement, will you not, in a strong, resonant voice, carrying conviction in every syllable? Nothing on these occasions creates so unfortunate an impression as the pause for thought, the hesitating utterance, the nervous twiddling of the fingers. Above all things, remember not to stand on one leg. Right, my boy, let us go."
I escorted him to my room, dug out the suit, showed him the bathroom, and left him to it. When I had got back to the dining room, Boko had gone, but Nobby was still there, chatting with Jeeves. She greeted me warmly. "Boko's gone to fetch his car," she said. "We're going to run up to London and get married. Wonderful how everything's come out, isn't it? I thought Uncle Percy was terrific." "Most impressive," I agreed. "And what words that tongue could utter could give even a sketchy idea of how one feels about you, Jeeves."
"I am deeply gratified, miss, if I have been able to give satisfaction."
"I've said it before, and I'll say it again. There's nobody like you."
"Thank you very much, miss."
I think this might have gone on for some time, for Nobby was plainly filled to the back teeth with girlish enthusiasm, but at this point I interrupted. I would be the last man ever to deprive Jeeves of his meed of praise, but I had a question of compelling interest to put. "Have you shown Florence that letter of mine, Nobby?" I asked. A sudden cloud came over her eager map, and she made a clicking noise. "I knew there was something I'd forgotten. Oh, Bertie, I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" I said, filled with a nameless fear. "I've been meaning to tell you. When I got up this morning I couldn't find that letter anywhere, and I was looking for it when Edwin came along and told me he'd done an act of kindness last night by tidying my room. I think he must have destroyed the letter. He generally does destroy all correspondence when he tidies rooms. I'm most awfully sorry, but I expect you'll find some other way of coping with Florence. Ask Jeeves. He's sure to think of something. Ah," she said as a booming voice came from the great open spaces. "There's Boko calling me. Goodbye, Bertie. Goodbye, Jeeves. I must rush." She was gone with the wind, and I turned to Jeeves with a pale, set face.
"Yes, sir."
"Can you think of a course to pursue?"
"No, sir."
"You are baffled?"
"For the moment, sir, unquestionably. I fear that Miss Hopwood overestimated my potentialities."
Come, Jeeves. It's not like you to be what's the word? It's on the tip of my tongue."
"A defeatist, sir?"
"That's right. It's not like you to be a defeatist. Don't give it up. Go and brood in the kitchen. There may be some fish there. Did you notice any when you were in there yesterday?"
"Only a tin of anchovy paste, sir."
My heart sank a bit. Anchovy paste is a slender reed on which to lean in a major crisis. Still, it was fish within the meaning of the act, and no doubt contained its quota of phosphorus. "Go and wade into it."
"Very good, sir."
"Don't spare the stuff. Dig it out with a spoon," I said, and dismissed him with a moody gesture. Moody was the word which would have described my aspect as a few moments later I left the house and proceeded to the garden, feeling in need of a bit of air. I had kept up a brave front, but I had little real hope that anchovy paste would bring home the bacon. As I stood at the garden gate, staring sombrely before me, I was at a pretty low ebb. I mean to say, I had been banking everything on that letter. I had counted on it to destroy the Wooster glamour in Florence's eyes, and lacking it, I couldn't see how she was going to be persuaded that I was not a king among men. Not for the first time I found myself musing bitterly on young Edwin, the fons et origo, a Latin expression, of all my troubles. And I was just regretting that we were not in China, where it would have been a simple matter to frame up something against the child, thus putting him in line for the death of 1,000 cuts, when my reverie was interrupted by the ting of a bicycle bell, and Stilton came wheeling up. After what had passed, of course, it was not agreeable to be closeted with this vindictive copper, and I am not ashamed to say that I backed a pace. In fact, I would probably have gone on backing, had he not reached out a hand like a ham and grabbed me by the slack of my coat.
"Stand still, you blasted object," he said. "I have something to say to you."
"You couldn't write?"
"No, I could not write. Don't wriggle. Listen."
I could see that the man was wrestling with some strong emotion, and could only hope that it was not homicidal. The eyes were glittering, and the face flushed.
"Listen," he said again. "You know that engagement of yours?"
"To Florence?"
"To Florence. It's off."
"Off?"
"Off,"
said Stilton. A sharp exclamation passed my lips. I clutched at the gate for support. The sun, which a moment before had gone behind a cloud, suddenly came shooting out like a rabbit and started shining like the dickens. On every side, it seemed to me, birds began to tootle their songs of joy. It will give you some rough indication of my feelings when I tell you that not only did all nature become beautiful, but even, for an instant, Stilton. Through a sort of pink mist, I heard myself asking faintly what he meant. The question caused him to frown with some impatience.
"You can understand words of one syllable, can't you? I tell you, your engagement is off. Florence is going to marry me. I met her as I came away from this pest house and had it out with her. After that revolting exhibition of fraud and skullduggery in there, I had decided to resign from the force, and I told her so. It removed the only barrier that had ever been between us. Question, she broke down and came clean, admitting that she had always loved me, and had got engaged to you merely to score off me for something I'd said about modern enlightened thought. I withdrew the remark, and she fell into my arms. She seemed not to like the idea of breaking the news to you, so I said I would do it. And if young blasted Wooster has anything to say, I told her, I will twist his head off and ram it down his throat. Have you anything to say, Wooster?"
I paused for a moment to listen to the tootling birds. Then I raised the map and allowed the beaming sun to play on it. "Not a thing," I assured him.
"You realize the position? She has returned you to store. No ruddy wedding bells for you."
"Quite."
"Good. You will be leaving here fairly soon, I take it?"
"Almost at once."
"Good,"
said Stilton, and sprang onto his bicycle as if it had been a mettlesome charger. Nor did I linger. I did the distance from the gate to the kitchen in about 3 seconds flat. From the window of the bathroom, as I passed, there came the voice of Uncle Percy as he sluiced the frame. He was singing some gay air, a sea shanty, probably, which he had learned from Clam, or one of the captains in his employment. Jeeves was pacing the kitchen floor, deep in thought. He looked round as I entered, and his manner was apologetic.
"It appears, sir, I regret to say, that there is no anchovy paste. It was finished yesterday."
I didn't actually slap him on the back, but I gave him the dickens of a beaming smile. "Never mind the anchovy paste, Jeeves. It will not be required. I've just seen Stilton. A reconciliation has taken place between him and Lady Florence, and they are once more headed for the altar rails. So, there being nothing to keep us in Steeple Bumpleigh, let's go."
"Very good, sir. The car is at the door."
I paused. "Oh, but dash it, we can't."
"Sir?"
"I've just remembered I promised Uncle Percy to go to the hall with him and help him to cope with Aunt Agatha."
"Her ladyship is not at the hall, sir."
"What? But you said she was."
"Yes, sir. I fear I was guilty of subterfuge. I regretted the necessity, but it seemed to me essential in the best interests of all concerned.
I goggled at the man. Egad, Jeeves.
Yes, sir.
Faintly from the distance there came the sound of Uncle Percy working through his shanty. How would it be, I suggested, to zoom off immediately without waiting to pack?
I was about to suggest such a course myself, sir.
It would enable one to avoid tedious explanations.
Precisely, sir.
Then shift ho, Jeeves, I said. It was as we were about halfway between Steeple Bumpleigh and the old Metrop that I mentioned that there was an expression on the tip of my tongue which seemed to me to sum up the nub of the recent proceedings. Or rather, when I say an expression, I mean a saying, a wheeze, a gag, what I believe is called a saw, something about joy. But we went into all that before, didn't we?
That was Joy in the Morning by P.G. Wodehouse, read by Jonathan Cecil.